What's harder, Ranger School or the Special Forces Q course, and what's the difference? Having a Ranger tab and the Special Forces tab, I get asked all the time which school was harder. The answer's complicated. Both schools are physically and mentally challenging, but in different ways. I generally say that Ranger School sucked more, but the Q course was harder. Let me explain more, and I will do so using 8 distinct criteria: duration and phase, graduation rates, food and sleep, ruck weight, patrol distances, and patrol standards. Let's start with duration and phasing. Ranger School is now 61 days long and consists of 3 phases: the Benning phase, mountains, and Florida. During the Fort Benning phase, you have all of your screening tests such as the Army Physical Fitness tests, the swim tests, the land navigation tests, and the 5-mile run. You learn the basics of patrolling via 12 to 15-man squad level patrols. You then bus to the Appalachian Mountains for Phase 2, Mountain Phase. Here you learn basic mountaineering skills and how to do platoon level patrols. You then conduct an airborne operation into Florida, do some survival and jungle warfare training, and then do platoon level patrols in the jungle for the remaining 10 days of Ranger School. With the exception of a 6-hour break before going to the mountains, Ranger School is non-stop. The Special Forces Qualification course, or Q course for short, is much longer, usually 12 to 18 months, which is depending upon which military occupational specialty, or MOS, you are assigned. Although the order of the phases changes every few years, candidates generally go through 6 unique phases: selection, small unit tactics, MOS phase, Robin Sage, survival school, and then language school. Special Forces selection is a 6-week tryout to see if the Army should invest millions of dollars into training you to become a Special Forces soldier. If you pass selection, you will then go to small unit tactics training, where you will learn basic patrolling. Next is the military occupational specialty training phase. This is where Special Forces medics learn how to be medics, engineers learn how to build and blow stuff up, and communications and weapons specialists learn the tricks of their trade. Officers learn how to plan and lead special operations. Everyone is brought back together for an amazing 6-week-long unconventional warfare exercise known as Robin Sage. Candidates then go to survival, evasion, resistance, and escape training known as SEER. Finally, candidates go to 6 to 9 months of language school. After all of these phases are done, a candidate graduates and is allowed to wear the Special Forces tab and Green Beret. Throughout this entire process, you might have a week off between phases to rest, and during language phase and MOS phase, your weekends are almost always free. Let's discuss graduation rates. I have to point out that I went to Ranger School after I went to the Q course. This is not the normal progression, but it worked out for me. The majority of the students in my Q course already had their Ranger tabs, yet only 18% of my Q course graduated. It normally isn't that low, but my year for some reason was an anomaly. There were 3 Special Forces guys in my Ranger School course, and all 3 of us graduated and did very well. What I learned from this is that having finished Ranger School doesn't guarantee graduation from the Q course, but as long as you don't quit, almost every Special Forces qualified candidate will graduate from Ranger School. Food intake. In Garrison, Ranger students eat at the dining facility. You recite the Ranger Creed, do your pull-ups, and you go in to eat. You're given a spoon only, no fork, no knife. You don't get to pick and choose your food. They simply put it on your plate. Sometimes you are given 5 minutes to sit down and eat, but sometimes you literally don't get to sit down, but have to eat as much as you can as you slowly walk to the back of the chow hall, put your tray on the cart, and walk out. This happened dozens of times to me, so I ate as much as I could of the high-calorie food, and I walked out of the dining facility mad and hungry. While patrolling, we got 2 MREs, or meals ready to eat, each day. MREs have 1,500 to 2,000 calories, so you average 3,000 to 4,000 calories a day. The problem is that you burn 4,000 to 10,000 calories a day, so you are working from a caloric deficit every single day of Ranger School, and this is why everyone loses weight at Ranger School. During the Q course, when you're not in the field, you frequently eat in the dining facilities. Although you eat in a hurry, you are not yelled at. So it is possible to eat hearty and high-calorie food to help you keep strong. When you are on a patrol, your team decides how much food to bring. During the summer, we would bring on average 1 MRE a day, but during the winter we might bring 2, or at least the best parts of 2. So in garrison, I ate 3 or 4 times more food in the Q course than I did at Ranger School, but in the field I actually ate more at Ranger School. Nevertheless, the caloric deficit was 100 times more painful and more noticeable at Ranger School. Let's move on to sleep. Both schools train you to minimize the effects of sleep deprivation. Let's look at how much sleep you get while in garrison and while patrolling. At Ranger School, they program training literally 20 hours a day, so even if you're not in the field, you don't get to catch up on your sleep. On the other hand, when you're in garrison during the Q course, you get 4 to 6 hours of sleep. And if you're in between phases or in an academic phase, you can get all of the sleep that you want. When patrolling, it is common to get only an hour or 2 of sleep or to not get any sleep at all. The biggest difference is that you patrol for longer periods of time at Ranger School. For example, my platoon patrolled for 10 days straight in Florida. In the Q course, you may do 3 days of patrolling, followed by 1 day in garrison where you refit and get some more training. This cycle means you get 3 days of little or no sleep, followed by 1 day of 4 to 6 hours of sleep. And this is much more sustainable than the Ranger School system. In summary, you get less sleep and less food than you need at both schools, which trains you to be tougher than you thought possible. But the effects of sleep deprivation and a constant caloric deficit are way more painful and noticeable at Ranger School. Let's move on to ruck weights. During Special Forces selection, rucksacks were weighed before and after land navigation. They had to weigh at least 45 pounds, so it was always a good idea to have an extra pound or 2 in your rucksack in case there was a variance in the scale. So let's say they averaged 47 pounds, plus 8 pounds of water. That means the lightest ruck I ever carried was 55 pounds. During my 71-kilometer individual long-range movement, I had an old-school Singars radio and 4 batteries. I specifically remember my ruck weighing 87 pounds. When patrolling during the later phases of training, we got to pack what was appropriate for each mission, to include food, ammo, and team gear. This usually averaged 60 to 70 pounds, but of course this weight changed daily depending on which weapon you carried. And my Robin Sage rucksack for infiltration was 100 pounds. The rucks at Ranger School were significantly lighter. We were required to carry a change of uniform and boots, our extra ammunition, and then our share of the team gear. I will say my ruck weighed between 45 to 60 pounds each day, but since you are always tired and starving, they hurt much more. Distances covered during patrols. The average Q course patrol might be 10 to 20 kilometers between the starting point and the final objective, while the Ranger School patrol was only 5 to 10 kilometers. Yet, the Ranger School patrol sucked more because you were more exhausted. And finally, patrol standards. The patrol standards were significantly higher at the Q course than at Ranger School. Let me give you an example. When I was patrol leader for a midnight ambush in the middle of the woods of North Carolina, I had just finished setting in the M240 Bravo on a tripod. It looks like this soldier in this image, except that it was pitch black. The instructor taped a laser pointer on the barrel of my 240 Bravo and then went 50 meters away and stood in the center of the kill zone. He then got out his GPS. In order to pass a patrol in the Q course, the center of your kill zone had to be plus or minus 25 meters from the grid given to you in your operations order. My navigation was spot on, so I passed that test. Then he had me turn the laser pointer on. This is because according to US doctrine, when setting up an ambush, the crew-served weapon should lay down, quote, grazing fire. The definition of grazing fire is constant automatic rifle fire at 1 meter high. To test this, he told me to turn on the laser pointer. The laser went across his waist, so I passed the location and the setup standards. Ranger School standards are high, make no mistake about it. But a Ranger instructor never got out a laser pointer to ensure that the crew-served weapons laid down textbook perfect grazing fire. Ranger School is the university, the Q course is graduate school. So there you have it, a summary of the difficulties of Ranger School and the Special Forces Q course. I have to say that the standards for the Q course were higher, but Ranger School sucked more. Both were hard, but hard in different ways. I learned a lot at both schools and absolutely recommend them to anyone with the courage to show up and the strength to finish. Thanks for learning. Please subscribe if you want to learn more, and don't forget to forward this video to a friend who also needs to learn this. Free the oppressed, and Rangers lead the way.